All right, welcome back to Overengineered, the podcast where we ask the question, what's the absolute best way to do things we have a perfectly acceptable solution for? Today, I'm here with Simon Hamp, and we're going to be catching up a little bit and talking about native PHP, which is something that I have been just sort of idly following along, just sort of on social media about, and very curious about. So I'm hoping that we can get into some interesting places there. But before you do, you want to say a quick hello and
Yeah,
all that?
sure. Hey everyone, I'm Simon. I'm, as Chris has kind of suggested, I am one of the creators of NativePHP, but I am a programmer. I have been doing that for a very long time, too long. That's why I have grey here and grey here. So yeah, that's enough about me for now, I think.
Yeah. When did you start programming?
Um, I would like to say I started programming when we got our first computer when I was a kid, and I was about 9 years old. So that's nearly it's 30 years ago. Because when we got a computer when I was a kid, the only way to interact with it was through the command line, and that's kind of programming, right? You're typing commands and the computer's doing stuff.
Sure. Yeah, that's fair.
I mean, it wasn't technically, there's going to be a lot of pedants that say, "Oh no, that's not programming." So I didn't really get into like writing code that was going to run until I was in my teens, like 16. I think I started writing a little bit of PHP. I'd dabbled with basic and things before that, but never with the intent to get any sort of professional or anything, not really doing stuff, just pottering around. And I sort of quickly went from doing an IT job where I was doing a bit of learning of programming in the background to full blown, like, this is going to be my career. So within 2 years, it was like I was 18. I switched to doing programming as a career. So
Did
yeah,
you
it's been a while.
did you start with basic or Visual Basic?
Basic. Yeah.
Oh wow. I have a deep fondness for Visual Basic still. In a lot of ways, I think, um, you know, I there's something that's still lost. The just beauty of
Yeah.
dragging a button onto a window and like
It was
double
super
clicking it,
approachable.
and you just write the code that happens when you click the button. And
Yeah, it was beautiful.
in a lot of ways, the needs of modern applications far exceed what's possible with that kind of very, very basic interface. But I see a lot of, I don't know, I see a lot of people building things that all feel like, in some way, an attempt to get back to that a little bit.
It's a really good paradigm for people. It's like the Excel and MS Access was like one of the first kind of proper pieces of database software that I ever used.
Mm-hmm.
And, you sort of doing a load of stuff in Excel, and then you go, I need something with a bit more structure and definition, and then somebody goes, have you heard about databases? And you're like, what? No, what's that? And well, I had, but it was like FileMaker or something, and I didn't have a Mac. Everybody was using Windows, so it was just like, well, Access is this thing. And then you get into all of that world of structured data, which was way more interesting. But that was the bit for me that got me onto like the GUI stuff, because it was like you've got the database, but then you need to attach buttons and things to it. And that's kind of how I got into like the Visual Basic side of stuff. But no, before that, it was all just like, you have to draw your own lines, figure out the little algorithms to draw lines on the screen and stuff. Oh, that's crazy.
Oh man. Yeah. So, so now how long has native PHP been a thing that like you've been involved with? Like when did that start? It's been a couple of years now, right?
Definitely at least a couple of years. So I mean, I've kind of told the story a few times, but it might be different every time I tell it, because my memory is a bit fuzzy. But basically, I was working for a company in the UK. So I'm from the UK, and I was working for this company in London, and a really cool startup that was doing like hardware stuff that was really interesting. But whilst I was there, we were kind of reaching for tools that could let us build desktop applications that could wrap up some internal tooling and maybe even provide some tooling to our R&D teams, so they could take physical goods equipment out to um, essentially beta testers and
Mhm.
just get people plugging devices into phones or laptops and using it in its kind of prototype stage and recording data for us and then passing that back to us. And we explored a few options, and it was, we're using PHP on the server side, and we're using Python for machine learning and all of these other things. And really neither of those, Python's a bit better, but neither of them are really good at kind of getting you up and running with like GUI
Sure.
GUI, graphical user interfaces. Um, Python is a lot better. There are really good tools, let's say third-party tools that make that easier. And we ended up using some of those. But because I went so far down this road of like, how do we do this in PHP? And I'm like, I do really want to do, I'm thinking back, I've wanted to do this in PHP for a really long time. I mean, I've been using PHP for 20 plus years, and it's like, wouldn't it be so great if I could just tap those skills and build apps for over there, that aren't like stuck on a server? And
Yeah.
it's, yeah, that led me down this path that bumped me into some wizard called Marcel Pociot, who only by like via Twitter, not that we actually spoke, but I saw some of the stuff that he was doing in that world for a while.
Hmm.
This is probably going back 6 years now, and
Wow.
wow, yeah, I kind of latched onto something that he'd posted on Twitter, and I was like, right, I'm going to save this. I'm going to come back to it when the time is right, and that time wasn't quite right. And I left that job at the end of 2022, and I was like, the time feels right to pick this project up again and see, and I went to see if Marcel had done anything more with it, and see, if they solved any of the problems that he was kind of bumping into. Kind of, it wasn't even directly related to this space, but tangentially close to it. And I just went down the rabbit hole for a couple of months. So I think it was like November 2022, and I sort of came out of the cave, bleary eyed, and in April or March of 2023, I was like, this thing actually works. I can build an app with this that I can throw on another machine, and it just runs. So this was like the birth of what became native PHP. And funnily enough, Marcel, like within a day of me posting about it on Twitter, he messaged me and he was like, "Hey, this is really cool." Like I was doing something similar, and shall we join forces? And then I had a call with him, and native PHP was born, and that was it. So yeah, it's been a long time in the making, but really it's been since 2023 that it kind of properly kicked off. So a couple of
Yeah.
years now.
Yeah, I mean, and I think like one of the things that's really interesting to me about the concept of native PHP is like it's like regardless of what is arguably the best tool for building a GUI, if you know PHP, uh, the fact that maybe Swift is built for it, and Swift UI exists if you want to build like a Swift app, doesn't really help you a whole lot if you want to get up and running right away, right? And so this
Yeah.
idea that like I can just translate the skill set that I already have over to something really quickly is really appealing and very interesting to me. Um,
Yeah.
on the flip side, I think like I have had I've had some hesitation myself because I find that especially for Well, this is true. I don't know. I find that for like native apps, um, a lot of the problem space tends to be in user interaction,
Hmm.
which is not necessarily where PHP shines. And I think
Sure.
because I am very comfortable with React, I find myself leaning towards the sort of like React based ecosystems. Whether
Hmm.
it's Expo and React Native for mobile, or something like just building a React app with a Tori or Electron
Sure.
backend. Um, and that's generally served me well, but um, you know it falls apart in the same places that React apps always fall apart, which is once you kind of like enter into certain areas of business needs, like there's just not a either there's not the like canonical solution, and you have to
Hmm.
start sifting through 1,000 different options to try to figure out which one's going to be around in 2 years, or there's just not a solution at all that's really acceptable, or is solid. um
Yeah. There's loads to kind of, I could dive into each one of those statements and go for probably an hour or more on each one of them, which I shouldn't do right now. But I think, the premise of this show probably sets the scene quite well. That, it's about building things that we don't really kind of need, and I would say, we don't need native PHP. You don't need to use PHP to do this. But what I've found, um, I wanted to. I
yeah,
wanted to have this tool that leveraged the skills that I already had, because I've spent a lot of time investing in those skills and kind of, maybe not intentionally always. I picked up PHP because it was convenient, and then I've run with it for so long now that I've got all this experience in PHP and now Laravel as well, building rich applications that run via the internet, and they rely on a whole suite of technologies. It's not just one thing. I use Tailwind, I use Inertia, I use React, I use HTML, CSS, JavaScript, everything that's built on top of those. That is the way that I build applications. And I want to be able to do that for these other platforms. And what I've been kind of surprised about is that actually so do so many other people. They
yeah,
they I think a lot of people see it the same way. It's like, yes, there are all these other tools out there, and they are all good in their own right, and they've all got, um, the levels of support that we require to determine whether this is a healthy investment from a business point of view for the next 3 to 5 years, the kind of typical cycle. um, and whatever other, like, it's got feature complete for the stuff that we think we need right now, and the stuff that we think that we need in the near future and the more distant future. um, but the fact is, you never know all of the stuff that you're going to need right away. And you don't know the true cost of running a piece of technology until you actually start running with it. Um, and from that angle, I kind of view it as, well, having this in PHP is just another option for teams, individuals, because now they can use something that they already know. And if you know PHP, if you know Laravel, being able to do this stuff with that ecosystem potentially opens some doors for you. And it kind of pulls your comfort zone around this new section of technologies that you weren't able to have before. Because
yeah,
if you didn't already know something like React, React Native, Flutter, or Swift and Kotlin, then you would have to go outside of your comfort zone as a business or as an individual to go and pull that technology into your comfort zone. Um, and that's what, like, native PHP is just kind of, I don't know, one of those video games where you just like extend the reach of your land, around the castle that you've just destroyed. It's kind of doing that for you, hopefully. And yeah, I think uh, it's just good. It's good for PHP as a language to have the optionality there. And I don't want to say it, but people do say these things about PHP and its viability. And I just like my experience in my 20 years of using it is that it's not been like that at all. It just keeps getting better and better. It's kind of exciting from personally to hopefully be seen as being involved in helping it get better and better. So
Yeah. So can we? I have I think I know, or I think I generally know how it works, at least on the desktop side.
yeah.
But I'd like to like check my assumptions here before going too far. So can we talk a little bit about the like nuts and bolts of how it actually works? Um,
Yeah.
here's my I'll say what I imagine and you correct me. How's that? So
Yeah. I'll try.
um, you know, there are two projects on the desktop. There's Electron and there's Tori, and it seems
Mhm.
like native PHP. You're working with both of those projects, right? Like you can use either of those as the framework.
So that is the plan. I'll say right now, Tory has been kind of put to one side. We
Okay.
so when Marcel kind of came to me and joined forces and he said this thing about I've got a talk at Laracon in 2023. This is the now the native PHP talk, but
Yeah.
before then it was not going to be native PHP at all. Like he was 3 months away from giving this talk or something, and he said to me one day, I'm gonna ask Taylor if I can change my talk to native PHP, and I was just like, oh my days, what? And because of that, he sort of drove this whole thing forward with Electron, which was something that he's very familiar with. Electron
Yeah.
is quite stable. I know people don't like the fact that it's huge because it's shipping a browser all the time, and there's all these performance quirks and what have you, but um, I believe Tinkerwell was built on Electron. Um, and
Not
so,
originally, but it is now.
sure. So, yeah, he's got a lot of familiarity with this. And I don't doubt that he'd already put some of the conceptual ideas for what we ended up building together, before what we did. So he sort of threw this stuff together and it was all really robust, kind of robust and working well um, on Electron, and I kind of started off with I want to use Tori because it's like the new kid, it's fresh, and it's doing all this stuff in Rust, like a new language, shiny, and basically I kind of got to a point where I'm like I can't do Rust well enough at the moment to make this viable and
Hmm.
quickly enough, and there's a lot of work just to do on the Electron side. And Marcel's been super busy with Herd and Tinkerwell and other products that the Beyond Code team are working on, which is completely understandable. And this thing being like fully open and free means I've got to be really cautious about where I put my time. So I said, okay,
Sure.
Tori, one side. Let's focus on Electron. So we've got Electron, but we'll talk about this in a little bit. But I think there's another option that will also come up. So
Okay. Interesting.
yeah,
Um,
but Electron, let's just focus on that for now.
okay. Well, I mean, I guess that gets at sort of the next question that I was going to ask, though, which is, um, so PHP, right? PHP is fundamentally written to run server applications, right? Like the primary interface that PHP, I mean, originally, right? Uh,
Yeah,
the primary interface that PHP has is the server API, right? That's like
definitely.
um, how input and output is kind of like interpreted by the actual like PHP system, right?
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure that's true.
fundamentally, yes. I mean, it's kind of really the two now. That you've got the CLI, so
Yeah.
it's just expecting the argv, argc stuff, environment variables, and I can go and run this script, and I've got access to all of that stuff. And then the server API SAPI kind of approach, which is I'm gonna expect input from a few different places. I'm gonna expect input in maybe the body of a document that comes into, as a request into the server, and I'm gonna
Yeah.
expect input from headers, and so the basic building blocks of a HTTP message is kind of where PHP started life, right? As you say,
Right. Right.
it's built for the web. This is kind of where we always go back to. PHP was built for the web. That's entirely why it's like that.
So I can picture, like, if I were kind of like naively trying to build something like native PHP, I can picture an approach where I essentially say, okay, we're essentially going to ship a PHP server
Mm-hmm.
that just lives side by side next to one of these like application container systems, right? Whether it's
Mm-hmm.
Electron or Tori or whatever else there is, right? It's like essentially just um, there's a web server that's bundled with this application, and the application essentially just makes HTTP requests to that server. Um, I would imagine that, and that would probably be the first way I would approach it. And then
Mm-hmm.
I imagine that over time, the need for more sophisticated sort of like interaction between the browser event loop and the quote unquote server would mean that I'd want to find some sort of deeper integration between, because whether it's Electron, which is using like a node process in the background, or whether it's Tori, which is
Uh-huh.
like building a Rust application,
Yep.
both of them are ultimately implementing some sort of like RPC system, right? Like a remote procedure call between the backend process in Electron. That's like the renderer process, right? Or the other one, the worker process. And
Yeah, I'm not going to pretend to know enough about electrons inner workings.
sure. Well, in Electron, there are two processes. There's like the browser process, and there's the worker, the renderer process, and the worker process, and they're talking to each other
Yeah.
over some sort of like RPC channel that's like a little
Yeah.
bespoke thing. Tori is the same thing, right? You define
Fundamentally. Yeah.
uh, you define functions in the Tori app in Rust
Mm-hmm.
that need to define some sort of messaging between that and the JavaScript on the front end. And so I can imagine um, potentially wanting to get to a place where rather than having your PHP process be a totally separate thing, that somehow PHP is like more deeply integrated into that like messaging bus, whatever it is for the system. Um, is that kind of the path that you went, or is that like the long term vision, or did you discover that it really doesn't matter and it's fine to just ship a PHP binary kind of like
Mm.
next to the app and it just works good enough? Or like where did you land on that?
So my yeah, I try and approach these things now, and this is something that I kind of feel that I've learned through the course of my career, and actually quite a lot from just spending some time with Marcel and kind of working through how he sort of approaches things, which is very interesting. Um, but to like find the path of sort of least resistance that gets
Mm-hmm.
you the sort of end result that you want as quickly as possible. Um, and it's definitely not the ideal. And I get a lot of heat from certain factors of the community of like this isn't native, and but the vision is definitely like PHP is a very capable language. It's one of a very few set of languages that has this paradigm of you know uh shared nothing in terms of memory, and this the kind of the web basis for it makes it very nice. You have this request and response cycle, and once you've done that once, everything's gone, and you kind of start it up again, and it's all fresh. So we're used to that as web developers. So the approach
Yeah.
was like, how can I make this so that it's as similar to
Yeah.
what we're used to already? Because if it's something that the majority of people who are in the community that I'm in, like I am part of, that I want to be part of, get, then I know that I can get sort of a foot in the door with people using it and trying it and hopefully expanding on it and all of that kind of thing. So the goal definitely initially is to make it feel really familiar. And that it goes beyond like the specific technologies to use, and it's why ultimately, I focus on Electron, because it doesn't matter between Electron and Tori. It's a preferential thing if you decide we want to use Tori, and that's just the way we go, because of whatever reasons your business decides that that's the right thing for you to do. But fundamentally, under the hood, it's going to work the same way. So it's like not really making that much of a difference. So having the PHP binary sat there by the side of this thing is absolutely fine from my point of view, and it's a completely suitable, maintainable approach. Is it the ideal? Maybe not, but you would still have to have the PHP binary at some level, whatever you do, because the whole goal of the thing is to be able to ship a PHP application to somebody. And if they don't have PHP on their system, how in the hell are they going to run it? So you have to be able to say, well, here's PHP as well. And it's kind of the same principle that Electron has taken. It's like, well, we don't know what browser you're going to have on your machine. We don't want to fiddle around trying to figure out how to make your browser render our application. So we're going to ship you a whole browser, and then then we know we can reliably kind of do stuff on top of that. And that's principally what we're doing. And it would be that way no matter what, whether it's Electron or Tori or something else. But I would say the ultimate vision for it will be that we don't even have a Tori or an Electron, because PHP, again, it is very capable as a language. It's quite possible for us to have, let's say, a C extension in PHP that knows how to speak the APIs of the specific platform you're on, and maybe open a window and render a web view in that window using whatever web view your system is capable of rendering by default. And so at that point, you're like, well, I'm kind of 80% of the way of like recreating Tori. So why
Right.
would I use Tori or Electron now when PHP can do this directly? And then yeah, then you get into the territory of like, okay, we need our own sort of message passing from the PHP core straight into these device APIs. And that would probably end up looking something quite similar to what Electron has built and what Tori have built. But it would probably be in a raw sort of well, not raw, but compiled C extension that gets baked into those PHP binaries. I think that's where we'll end up. Yeah, I don't know how long that's going to take, but yeah, that's kind of the ultimate vision.
And so ultimately, it sounds like in that paradigm, you'd need something like Octane, right? Like you'd need some sort of event loop driving all of that. Would you, and again, like obviously there's the like stopgap, but would you imagine that would be the direction that you'd go to straight away, or maybe not at all? Or do you think that like ultimately it could be that there's like you know a PHP slash C ish thing that's like orchestrating the application itself, and then it's dispatching requests to the native PHP application to kind of keep that separation? Because obviously, I appreciate what you said about like the model that everyone or most people who are familiar with PHP are used to is this,
Yeah,
single request
response.
lifecycle. And the moment that you have something running in shared memory, you run into all sorts of new problems. They're not they're certainly manageable, but like you have to learn a new set of skills around memory management and understanding like how to debug memory leaks, and it can be very difficult.
Yeah, and I one of the main goals I would say for this whole project is to try and keep it feeling familiar to people who are coming at
Yeah.
this from a web development angle. Because well, from a personal point of view, I fundamentally believe that the web is the greatest technology that we've invented in the last 40, 50 years, and it's the basics of it are very simple, and like
Yeah.
it's very accessible. And I think there's a lot of technologies that we use today that are they've become very popular because they've got, I don't know, big organizations behind them and whatever, but they're not as accessible and they're not as portable, and they're never going to be. And I think that makes the web sort of paradigm very like attractive to a much larger proportion of people. And
Yeah.
and I think PHP has kind of echoed that for a really long time as well. PHP has been approachable and accessible, uh, which is why it runs, like 80% of the web, and why
Yeah.
so many people know PHP even if they don't like it anymore. And, yeah, all of that kind of thing. And I think today it's still a great language to get started with, even if you don't end up making a whole career with PHP, because it is just approachable. I would like for PHP as a language to stay that way. I think for native PHP as a tool, I think it makes sense for us to try and keep it approachable, because it doesn't have to be the tool that everyone at every level of like application development uses to build their applications. Like it can just be the prototyping tool, or it can be the internal apps tool. I mean, I would love to see people building all sorts of stuff with it, but I haven't got any delusions of grandeur about that. So, but yeah, I mean, in terms of the paradigm, then I think it makes sense for it to kind of stick with this sort of request response cycle, or at least, as you said, kind of with Octane, you can kind of make it feel like you're still doing that when you're not really doing that. The only challenge, I guess, for that right now is the cross-platform support. So we're really piggybacking off of the fact that other people, smarter people than me certainly, have done all of this hard work in tools like Electron and Tori and whatever else to smooth over the cracks between the different platforms. And
Yeah.
PHP is actually quite good at cross-platform work. I mean, if you look at what's going on in PHP source code, you'll see like there's a whole bunch of stuff that handles Windows isms, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that just works on Linux and
Yeah.
Mac, Unix like systems. So PHP is pretty good for that. But there are, we're getting into the territory, as you said, like PHP wasn't really built to do some of this stuff. And then when you get into the edges of like, I want to run threads, on the machine that can do this thing in a background task and whatever, PHP doesn't really give you those things. But the tools that
Yeah.
we're kind of yes, I did see. There's been another proposal come through for something similar to that the other day, but
Yep.
yeah, we can get away with a lot whilst we use these other tools, so
Sure.
one of the famous ones is like process control, which
Okay.
PCNTL extension in PHP is just not supported on Windows. And it's actually,
Mm.
you think, oh, that's such a shame, because it's a super powerful piece of like PHP internals that you probably use a lot without even realizing it.
Yeah.
Certainly Octane uses it under the hood. A bunch of tools use it. There's like the fork package. I think
Yeah.
it's a SPACY package that's called fork, that kind of lets you spin up kind of other processes effectively within the same process. All of that will only work on Linux and Mac. And that's not because PHP can't support it. It's literally because Windows doesn't have a way to do that stuff well.
Mm-hmm.
And so, when people reach for that kind of tooling across different platforms, when we're building something like this, where we're saying like this works on Windows and Mac and Linux, we have to provide some reasonable alternatives, and we can do that because of the work that's going on in Electron, and what Node is capable of managing across those platforms. So it's really like fusing the different technologies together is where the power comes. And we shouldn't be like purists and try and rely on PHP to do all of this stuff either, because I don't think that's its greatest strength. Honestly, PHP's strength has been in, I just do this thing with the server. I get a request, I do my work, and then I pass the response back out. And I just do that process really quick from like a cold start. If I can do that well, I'm happy. That's kind of PHP's universe.
Yeah.
And I'll let HTML and browser renderers and all of that like figure out what they're doing over there. I'm not going to touch that stuff. And we're kind of taking the same approach. It's just like, oh, well, you need the browser view to be rendered by a node process, or you need to spin up sub processes. Fine, like we'll hand that off to somebody else to go and do that for us, who's kind of taking care of it a bit better than we care to. And I think that's fine.
Yeah. Okay, so then it sounds to me, at least on the desktop side, that native PHP is essentially you've got the the application framework, which in this case is Electron, right?
Yeah.
You've got the PHP binary.
Yep.
You've got some amount of bespoke code to make those two things play nice together.
Yeah.
Is that um, is that something that's just like you basically have um, some native PHP, um, something that can handle incoming requests and sort of like parse out whether it's coming from your the native PHP side or from the application side, and it's all just sort of coming in through HTTP requests, or is there like a dedicated channel between Electron and PHP that's just like the native PHP channel? How does that work?
Yeah. At the moment, it is like we spin up. PHP's got its own built-in server, PHP
Mm-hmm.
-s at the command line. So it's straightforward enough at this stage to have that just spin up at the beginning of the application's lifecycle. So one of the first things that Electron does, so in JavaScript code, is to spin up from the PHP binary that we ship, give me a server instance, and point it at the code that we've shipped with you that's our PHP application or our Laravel application. So
Yep.
it's literally just then running a server that's waiting for requests in a very traditional sense. And that works across all of the major platforms. So that's like a very nice and simple starting point for a lot of this stuff. But you do get into like the two-way comms and all of that. And what we've done, Marcel did this really. This was kind of his initial piece on this, was to do a similar thing on the Electron side. So it spins up a server too, and we basically got two HTTP servers talking to each other over I'll say a secured channel. They only talk to each other as long as they exchange the same key.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we can kind of lock all of that down, but it is very like the traditional. I mean, you could look at it as like a server to server API, two-way API communication that's happening, but it's all just happening on your local machine, which in a sense feels like overkill, but in some respects it's actually sort of fundamentally the same as a lot of other applications will do. They'll open sockets and they'll
Mm-hmm.
create a channel of communication, and they'll have a mechanism for like the format of the messages. And we've just gone, well, our channel of communication is these TCP sockets, and the message format is HTTP. So we're just like sitting on top of all the stuff that we
Sure.
already knew. So
Yeah.
that keeps it really familiar for now, at least. I think that could be improved in the future, but without kind of affecting the developer experience.
Hmm.
So yeah, we'll see how that changes, but that's kind of how it is right now.
And then it seems to me like the other big piece, and like, I'm leading up to the question of, if you had to pick which of these pieces feels like the core of native PHP. I know that obviously all of it is important, but it feels like the last piece is really just the tooling that binds everything together, that bundles up the PHP, that makes sure that, yeah, the files are in the place that Electron is expecting, and
Yeah.
the PHP server is compiled, for the system properly, and all. It seems like the build process, if I had to guess, is probably the most sort of special sauce part of the whole project. Is that true?
Mm, I mean, there are steps that we have to take that would be unusual if you were just building an Electron application, kind of the way that an Electron documentation tells you to do it.
Hmm.
So yeah, special source. I don't know. I think if you go through it, the thing with it is I'm so familiar with it that it feels passe to me now. It's
Hmm.
like, and I think if you're coming at this with fresh eyes, you'll look at some of this stuff and you'll go, "Huh, that's cool." Like, I didn't even know that you could do that with PHP, or that you could do that with Electron, or whatever. Whichever angle you're coming at it from, there'll be stuff to learn, and I think that's really cool. And I have to kind of remind myself of that people coming fresh at this are going to experience it in kind of the way that I experienced it when I first figured out how to make some of these things work. But yeah, for me, actually, the kind of secret sauce is not so secret. It's it all came down to having the ability to build the static binary, right?
Hmm.
Because PHP, you can ship PHP from one machine to another. Like, you can have the dynamic build, and I don't want to get too into that unless you want to, but you can do it. It's just very painful because you'd have to not just compile it for the right platform, like the CPU architecture and the operating system as a duo sort of combined to decide, like, this is what applications need to be compiled for, right?
Yep.
So if you don't target the right architecture and operating system, it ain't gonna run. And so you can do that. We do that with PHP right now, but we do that typically with this dynamic version of PHP, which means that the core PHP executable is actually very small. It's like a few megabytes. And the rest of PHP is kind of dynamically loaded in. So all these extensions that we enable can be compiled for that platform. So the same operating system and architecture, but then they are these extension files. So like on Linux, they're the .so files. On Windows, it's .dlls. On Mac, I think it's .dlibs. And they're like executables that aren't executable on their own. They have to be pulled into the application, and they can be pulled in at runtime. That's why they're dynamic. And PHP has lived on that paradigm for it's pretty much its whole existence. It's been a fundamental piece of DevOps server engineering architecture for PHP installations for almost all of its history. And that's fine. But if you try to take everything built for one platform, so let's say Mac OS, the M series CPUs, and I just take my installation of PHP and send that over to your M series Mac, it still wouldn't work because there'd be a bunch of stuff that's referencing specific paths on my machine. and stuff that my machine maybe had at the time that it was compiled to what your machine doesn't have because of like version differences or quirks of
Sure.
yours, because I know you set up your system in some weird way. So it wouldn't necessarily work out of the box. And
I'm living the no homebrew lifestyle over here, by the way.
I knew it. I knew it. Me too now, but it's fine. The yeah, so the getting it to this place where you can basically compile PHP, a version of it, for a given target platform OS and architecture that can then be shipped across to other systems of that architecture was the real kind of critical piece. Basically, I wanted
Mm-hmm.
like one file. Like, can I get PHP as a core engine as one file? And then I can just pass that to somebody and pass them the script that I want them to run and say, hey, can you just try and run this? Like, you've got no PHP, right? And if I give you this and I give you that, can you run those things? And it worked.
Hmm.
But that wasn't anything that I did. I can't take credit for that. Some very smart people created this static PHP CLI library, which has been used since then, since before then, to build a lot of this stuff. And that was the thing that kind of Marcel had bumped into the years before, so when I was saying 6 years
Mm-hmm.
ago. This was this tool that he kind of shared something about adjacently on Twitter, and I was like, when I went digging, I found it, but at the time, it didn't support enough of the stuff to do Laravel. So the goal
Mm-hmm.
for me wasn't just like, let's get this static executable that I can ship to another machine. I want one that can run a Laravel application, which sets the bar just a little bit higher. And that's what took me like 4 months to figure out. Basically, it was like, how do I get the people who are doing that thing to help me get this up to that level? And I worked with them. There's one person who calls himself Jerry. I think it's just him or her, them, uh, over in China. I believe they're in China,
Hmm.
and just working on this package on their own, essentially, and just building out all the stuff that people were asking for.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, they got it working, and I got a build out of it that could run Laravel, and it was just like, this is the eureka moment. This is the thing that now is going to unlock this stuff. Um, so yeah, I think that's, from a technical point of view, that's kind of the secret sauce, is to have that kind of new way of thinking about distributing PHP. But I think if I want to take it to a bit more of a philosophical level, I think the secret sauce there is more about being persistent, and working with much smarter people than me to figure these things out. And yeah, I got that. Kind of gets you down into the path of like, how the heck do you compile these things? How did you figure all this stuff out? And this is a person who's doing this almost, I'll say, pre-Chat GPT era, and learning about how to compile things and do it statically and running it over and over and over again until you get it working, which is something I've unfortunately also gone through in the intervening period. But yeah, it's really, I can't say enough good things about people who are putting lots and lots of effort into really tough projects. And like, if you can find people who are doing that and work with them, I think you stand a good chance of having a really good time. I think that's ultimately the secret sauce.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree there. I mean, I think that there's a little bit of, I, and I get it, and it's rightly so to a degree. I think there's some frustration in the web dev space around. I mean, I see people complaining, especially in JavaScript, like, how much of building in JavaScript app feels like just npm install, 1,000 different things and patch them together. And, obviously that can lead to problems, especially long-term maintainability potentially. But
Mm.
at the same time, I mean, I think it's kind of amazing that we can just pull together all these sort of incredible little building blocks that people have worked on and build these amazing applications with them. It makes me think of when Marcel was first working on Tinkerwell.
Mm.
Um, I saw him posting about it, and I DM'd him and I said, "Oh, I've been working on a similar thing. Like, here's the code base. Use it if you want," because I had kind of walked away from it.
Mm.
Um, and I think when I was working on that project, it was so kind of incredible to me because here was, essentially, I take Electron, right? I combine that with the Monaco package, which is essentially all the UI from VS Code that
Yeah,
renders a
the
really
editor. Yeah.
robust code editor, right? And then I grabbed a TTY package,
Mhm.
like a Node TTY package that had a React counterpart for the front end of it, right? And so in in 30 lines of my own
You're just
code
like,
and the backs of incredibly smart people, I was able to just wire up this
yeah,
application that has like this incredibly robust,
yeah,
code editor on one side, a fully functional terminal on the other side,
yeah.
running in a native application, talking to my PHP app, and it was just kind of like, it shouldn't be, this should be illegal. Like, I
It's
shouldn't
like,
be allowed to do this. I did no work and I have this incredibly full functioning application. Um,
yeah, it's true.
and
It's yeah,
it's amazing. It's an
it
amazing
is
thing that we
amazing.
have this stuff available to us, and it really is
Yeah,
an incredible thing that people give so much of their work away, that that it enables really significant,
yeah.
building on top of those building blocks.
I think it's I can't pretend to know where it came from, but a worldview really that's come. It feels to me like it's come out of the sort of technology California startup area, lots of smart people coming to one place and sort of going, oh, wouldn't it be great if I could build on your stuff and we weren't trapped by corporations and their trademarks and lawsuits and we just, and then open source is the thing that sort of was birthed out of this um, approach to doing things. And I think fundamentally, like, I do believe that that is the right way to go with a lot of this stuff. If
Hmm.
you want like longevity, if you whatever that means, where you want to explore what's possible. I do believe like collaboration is far better than competition. Competition leads to
Absolutely.
like death and decay because it's just like a race to the bottom and all of these kinds of things. But when we've seen like when people collaborate and openly, like the amazing things that it's brought to the world and the benefits that it's brought when used properly is an incredible kind of way to think about doing things. And it's one of the first decisions that we had to make about native PHP is like, uh, do we keep this to ourselves or do we put it out there for everyone to use? And honestly, that's quite a hard decision to make when you look at like the amount of time that's involved in doing this stuff and the effort that you have to go to, the investment that you've gone to learn these things and put it into practice. um, but it stuck with me to say, like, choosing to do it that way and go open source has paid off in many ways in dividends, like not just from a financial point of view, certainly not from a financial point of view, but it does the collaborative spirit has really come out of the community and the Laravel community and PHP communities that have kind of jumped onto that technology and started building stuff with it. And some of the people that I've met because of it, and they've kind of really been drawn to doing stuff on it, with it, for it. And it's been amazing. And maybe somebody will use it and build something great with it in the future. I don't know, but the potential for that is all there because it's fully open. And yeah,
I
I think that's
I
amazing.
also think, I mean, obviously there is like the dark side to open source, like, right? There is in a lot of ways um, there are people that take advantage of the free labor of others, right? And
Yeah.
and you certainly see that uh, particularly with like large corporations, using building on top of open source and then not necessarily contributing back, and
Mm,
also sort of expecting free maintenance from the maintainers when they run into issues. Like, obviously all that stuff is real,
yeah.
and in a lot of ways people have to have um, a certain amount of access or privilege to be able to do it, and that's like not great. There are a lot of pieces that we're still trying to figure out, for sure. But at the
Mm,
same time, I think in a lot of ways, as an indie developer, open source lets you sort of amplify your exposure so much, right?
mhm,
Because, right, if you're like comparing the native PHP story, like two imaginary timelines,
mm,
the timeline where you launch this thing and you say it's closed source, and
yeah.
comes with some sort of licensing fee. Um, I have a hard time imagining that without, a Microsoft can do something like that, right? Or a company that has investment. Sometimes you need to raise money to go tackle a big problem, and that is a path. But if
Mhm,
you're not interested or you don't have that kind of access, like, I think it would be real hard to convince a community of other like sort of independent tinkerers and builders, and particularly in our community, folks who are really invested in open source. I think it's a lot harder to get traction and exposure if you don't have some sort of, it's not even that it's the open sourceness of it all exactly. I think it's more, when it's open source, I know that there is a path um, for this to live on, regardless of what your interests end up being, and what
mhm,
your intentions, or focus, where your focus goes. Like, once it gets to a certain point as an open source project, it has a life of its own, and it has I know that I can commit to it in a different way than if
yeah.
it's a solo dev working on a closed source project, where who the hell knows where they're going to be in 5 years, and what their commitment to this project is going to be in 5 years. You know what I mean? So I don't think it's as straightforward as, oh, well, if I had done this fully closed source, I could have made more money. Like, I think that is not like a real parallel. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think um, there's lots of good examples and there's lots of bad examples in open source of how people have tried to do all of the different variations and how successful they've been, and some have done exactly the same as somebody else and they've been more successful or less successful. And there's
Yeah.
no one like template for it that makes sense for everyone in every situation. It's a combination of things, and eerily it does look like building a product. Like, you can't just go, I'm going to build this thing because, I think it needs to exist. And therefore, I'm going to while away the hours and days and weeks and months and years building this thing. And I'm going to release it to the world. And of course, everyone's going to love it because I've spent years building it, and then it kind of falls flat on its face because actually nobody needs this thing. And it's like it's just been an academic exercise for you. It's just been like a thing that you found interesting. It's like I think there are fundamentals for open source to make sense. I think you've got to have a clear expectation, clear goal, and you do have to, unfortunately, understand the market a little bit. Like you do have to know, is this the kind of tool that is going to go wild and I'm going to be on the hook for support and nobody's going to pay me any money for, or like sponsor me or donate, these kinds of things. And if I want that, how much work am I going to have to do to get that? Because that's a hurdle. It's free, and you've got to overcome that hurdle in order to get people to help you on that front. And then yeah, like you could do the whole like closed source route, and it just that can completely falter because you haven't done the market analysis again. It's just like there are almost fundamentals to business that apply to doing open source. But if you do a little bit of this thinking about what you're doing and plan accordingly and kind of set your expectations accordingly, I think you can have success with open source in whatever way that looks to you. And it might just be that your tool gets used by a few hundred or a few thousand people, or that you get some donations, like some sponsorships. If those are your expectations, then and you work towards those things, knowing what you know about what the likelihood is that people are going to use it, then that's what you'll get to. I firmly believe that people can do that. If you've got this, like, I'm going to build a little thing, I'm going to throw it out, millions of people are going to like it, and I'm not going to have to give any support, and people aren't going to demand stuff for free, then you can also do that. You just have to do it in a way of like, there it is, and you sort of walk away from it. You just like throw it out and forget about it, and maybe come back in 5 years and find that it's been downloaded a million times. It's like, oh, cool. So yeah, in terms of the templates I'm sort of thinking of, though, I think it's quite good to reference, maybe unfortunately to just harp on about Laravel because that's the community that we're in, but Taylor had done such a good job with setting Laravel up as an open source thing and managing it, running with it for the time that he did whilst he was, in employment doing other stuff. And I know he was fortunate to be able to have some of his employment time kind of working on Laravel, but not everybody's going to get that. But the thing that I think he did was kind of at the right time. And I think this comes from like a good sense of what's going on. What do people need? What can I provide for them at this time that's going to suit their need? As he identified that the framework in that, in the PHP space was in need of something better. But then even when it got to the point where he went all in on Laravel, having that like awareness of like, this is the time to do this right now. I was thinking when you were sort of saying about connecting the wires together, it reminded me of that scene from Back to the Future, the first one, right, kind of right at the end where Doc is like trying to get those two wires together. But it's sort of fortuitously at the exact right moment that he does it, and the lightning bolt passes through as well. And I think there are these moments in history of technology, but history of the world, and like these big moments of things that happen where it just feels like it's just the right time. It's like coincidence. And maybe it was in some cases, but I don't think so. I think a lot of the time people are aware of the circumstances, and they create the environment that allows them to kind of bring these things together, and at the time that the lightning bolt is striking, and I think Taylor did that with Laravel, not so much necessarily when he built it and put it out there. Definitely that was like one version of it, but I think when he said to the world, I'm going to go all in on this, that was a massive signal to say, this is ready, like you can all use this. And I think I wouldn't be surprised if Laravel's adoption went up massively because of that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you're like really serious about doing open source, if you can get to that point where you can go, this thing, I've got strong signals to believe that this is a worthwhile thing for me to pursue, and I can go all in, it's going to change people's perspective of the whole thing. And yeah, that's like, I would love to do that. Basically, I think that's the ideal in many ways, because then you get to work on something that you love doing, and you haven't got maybe you haven't got too many people telling you what to do. You just got loads and loads of users telling you, hey, I want this for free. But yeah, it's kind of the world becomes a bit of your oyster at that point in time, it feels like. And maybe I'm idealizing that way too much, I don't know. But yeah.
No, I mean, I don't know. I think a lot about the being in the right place at the right time. I think that,
Yeah.
um, my company's success is very much um, a story of being in the right place at the right time. I think that
Sure.
we started delivering things via the internet right at the time when people were finally sort of getting
Yeah.
over their anxiety about using the internet for more things.
Mm-hmm.
And so, um, yeah, I think we caught that wave at just the right time. And I think that it's like um, it's a difficult thing to really figure out, because it's like, I think to some degree you have to be at the right place at the right time, but at the same time, you can be at a good place at a good time and
It's
not
true.
see an opportunity, right? So it's like, I talk with my business partner Nick about this from time to time, because I think I tend to see the story a little bit more through the lens of like, we just got lucky,
Mm.
because I think we did just get lucky in a lot of ways. We just kind of um, started building a web application the year that PHP became like a stable tool for building web applications. And um, yeah, I mean, there were a lot of things that we just got really lucky with. But he reminds me, and I do think that he's right, that it's like, well, if it's so much about luck, uh, or if it's so much about like, the opportunity of the moment, um, you still have to like be going for it to seize those
Yeah.
opportunities, or else it doesn't matter, right? Um, and I do think that it really is sort of like, both of those things have to be true. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
um, Taylor could have gone all in on Laravel 5 years earlier or 5 years later, and maybe he would have missed the wave, right?
Yeah.
But if he didn't go all in, he probably would have missed it too, right? It's
Yeah.
both those things. Um, and yeah, and it's like, unfortunately, you only get to find out in hindsight if you were right.
Yeah.
But if you don't go for it, you never find out, right? It's like this horrible catch-22 in a way, but it can be
Yeah.
very rewarding if it does work out.
I think there's like a point where, I mean, I feel like I've heard him say, maybe this is my memory just being terrible, but kind of, it had got to the place where effectively, I think Ian was telling him, like, you have to go and do this because it's
Yeah, I
taking up
remember him
too
saying
much
that.
of your time. And so, like, that's a great position to be in.
Yeah.
That's like the universe telling you, do this, or else,
Yes.
Ian is the universe. Do this, or else you're stupid, or something, like, that's not fair, but you'd be silly not to, is kind
Use
of
some
the.
sort of poker analogy.
Oh, yeah. Like,
He
if you
just
don't
got
play that
dealt
hand,
ace king suited.
yeah, yeah. Like, why are you folding? What are you doing? um, I don't play poker enough. It's been a long time since I played. But anyway, that's beside the point. Yeah, I think you've definitely got to be alert to the opportunity. You've got to be decisive enough at that moment to be able to do the right thing. And those moments
Yeah.
might not come. Like, if you try and force it, it's probably not the right time. It's like, um, yeah. I mean, I can imagine, like, almost Taylor wanting to do it. I can imagine lots of people wanting to do it with, like, very successful open source packages, and not being able to because it doesn't make sense for them, their family, like, whatever their goals. And he, at that point, I think he'd already built Forge, basically, which is the thing that then allowed him to go and do that, right? Because it
Yeah.
was making, hopefully, more than enough money to survive on. So that's the point. Is like, you've got to have the thing that kind of makes it make sense. I don't think you can just bluff your way through it. Some people have, and they usually get found out at the end. And it's like, wait, you didn't know what you were doing, and you're sort of successful. And it's like, yeah. And people are like, I can't repeat that. It's like, that's
Yeah.
unbearable. So, yeah, I think you've got to have these, like, the threshold for when it makes sense. And you just got to be watching very closely. But yeah, I do think luck is part of it as well.
And there's also very different types of open source projects, right?
Sure.
I think that for the most part, I'm a pretty prolific open source developer, but I mostly build small utility packages that solve a need that we have. So I'm satisfied, if I get to use it and maybe we get a few free bug fixes from someone
Mhm.
else finding a bug before we run into it and submitting a PR, that's about the goal, right?
Mhm.
And a lot of these, are the types of open source packages. The open source project that I built that has the most usage is probably the one that would be the most difficult to monetize or build a business around,
Sure.
because it's just like low level utility that lots of people have the need, but no one's really paying attention to it. It's just like a dependency that you install and then move on.
Mhm.
Whereas something like Laravel and something like NativePHP, these are sort of like uh, projects that are going to remain sort of central to the developer experience throughout the project. Um, and I think, have opportunity for like a commercial ecosystem to exist around them, right? Like no one,
Yeah.
no one is going to build a successful commercial business around, pad left or whatever the famous node package was.
Yeah.
Um, but here that there's a lot more opportunity there, and it's the type of project that just lends itself to it.
Yeah.
Um,
Those are also steeped in, like, what level of complexity do you want to engage at? It's
yeah,
like, if you're prepared to go in and build something like a Laravel, then the reward stands to be potentially much greater, and not necessarily just financially, but like the outcome stands to be orders of magnitude greater than creating a pad left package or a Boolean recreation. Yeah, but none of those are bad. Like maybe there needed to be a pad left package in Node. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I had a need in Node that I built a small package to solve, and lots of other
Yeah,
people had that same need, and it's like
yeah.
there's a place for that too, but it's not. It's more the sort of um, it's a different flavor of open source, right? It's
Hmm.
like this is giving back to the community and hopefully getting
Right.
something in return for it in terms of like other people maybe helping solve similar
Yeah.
problems or just knowing that other people get to you know take advantage of a solution
Yep.
that you found um, and that can't sustain that. It has to be done for a different reason, right? And that's why it sort
Exactly.
of lends itself to those small utilitarian type things where it's like it's
Hmm.
not a huge commitment to put out there and maintain to some degree.
Yeah, exactly. And again, it comes back to setting your expectations accordingly in terms of how much time you're going to invest in that
Yeah,
thing, and like
yeah,
what you're expecting to see on the other end from it. Is it financial, or is it more of like a social thing? Is it that you're just going to get a few followers on whatever your favorite social network is today, and that whatever it is, or
yeah.
engagement from one of the things that I've said before I have absolutely loved about having this project and sort of running with it is the people that have come out of it.
Yep,
And I've
absolutely.
I've got to know, and I got to meet some of them at Laracon EU, when we first met, and it's been amazing because they've come to me and they've said like, "This is great, thank you so much," and I've got to know them, and I went to dinner with some of them, and it's just been like amazing to build really good relationships with people off the back of this stuff, and I think that can be even more rewarding than anything else,
A
honestly.
100%. Yeah. I mean, I feel like that was a core part of the core thesis of my Laracon talk was
Yeah,
essentially that was what made it worth it, right? Like ultimately
100%.
it's those relationships and all the other things that you kind of get out of it that are more intangible.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, I think that brings us to the next stage of the native PHP story, which is mobile, right? Because um,
Yeah.
we just talked about open source for
Yeah.
for
I
45
know.
minutes or whatever, and
Scrap all of
ultimately,
that.
um, well, but I mean, I think it's like an interesting question. It's like I think that native PHP probably couldn't have made it if it started out as a closed source project, but at a
No,
certain
I
point, you
agree.
decided that you had to launch a piece of the puzzle as a closed source project because you want to be able to invest in it. And I think it's like an interesting balancing act that you're going to have to navigate.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, like what that's been like and what the decision that went into that looked like.
So yeah, I mean, the juxtaposition in this conversation right now, but that's also happened in the past of like you've got this open source library, and now you're releasing a new kind of essentially part of it. To be clear, it could have been something completely different, and we chose just to like put it under the native PHP banner because it sort of makes sense. Like this is very related, um, but this piece is going to be closed source, the mobile piece, and in some respects, that's kind of an easy decision because it's so distinct from the desktop stuff. There's
Hmm.
really essentially no overlap. Um, I mean, some of the stuff we can use from the desktop stuff to make things a little bit easier and familiar on the mobile stuff, but other than that, they're kind of chalk and cheese. So um, that from the kind of technical aspect, that was sort of easy to do. I think the more like tricky one for others to grasp is the social aspect of it, because I think for the most part people's expectations are that it would be free. I remember when I said from stage, I was like, should I even say this line? Because I just don't know if it's the. But I'm like, I need to just be open with people. I just need to be like upfront. This thing is not. It's not going to be free. And then it's like there was this audible gasp. I think it was just one person, but in the audience, like, oh, and I was like. I'm not sorry about that.
Yeah.
I have my own little, Caleb does these notes on work, and that got me doing the same kind of thing. It's like a cathartic recording your own voice, and then occasionally posting it when I feel cute enough. But I did go into some depth on this a little while ago because it is an important piece, and the thinking process behind it actually isn't that easy. But it's not from as I say, the technical point. It is more the like one hand the business decision, and that's the biggest one, honestly.
Yeah.
I see, like, I love working on native PHP, hands down. Like, it's the most interesting project I've ever done. I think it is the thing that I will do for many more years if the the community and everybody engaged with it allows me to. um what I need in order to be able to do that is to say, like, this can support me in some way.
Yeah.
And so I went on that kind of crusade at the beginning of last year, or even really towards the tail end of 2023, of like, how can I encourage more people to sponsor this project? And you do all the things like, here's the little trinkets that I can give you. If you sponsor me, you can get your logo on the site, and blah 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 blah. And actually speaking directly to a lot of people and trying to get agencies and other organizations sort of buy into the idea of it, reaching out to various organizations across. I'm in the EU, so there's various tech grant processes that are going on here, and I did loads of those. It was like trying to apply to all of these different sources of kind of non-commitment funding as possible, and going to them with the look, we can do desktop right now. It's not V1, but we want to get there, and we've got our eyes set on doing mobile as well. And we think this is a really good opportunity because the PHP community is huge, and help. And they all were like, nah. So
Sure.
it was just like, okay. And I'm really grateful for the sponsors, a lot of individuals, a few organizations that have sponsored native PHP kind of through me on GitHub sponsors mainly, because they have helped like massively. I've been able to like shave off days of paid work with clients, to actually work on this stuff and move it forward. And I think it's noticeably moved forward in the last 12 months because of that, precisely because of that. So when sponsoring open source makes a difference. Please sponsor open source, sponsor more open source. But when it's used in the right way, it can make a huge difference. And yet, despite all of that, it's nowhere near enough for me to say, like, not only am I not comfortable going all in, like, it literally just would not be enough to pay my bills and
Yeah.
things. So it's like, I can't do that. Could I get somebody else involved? And I have. There are a lot of the sponsorship that comes in now goes straight out to other contributors. So I don't even see that money personally. And that's what I want to do. I want, where the community supports something, that it goes back out to support the people that are working on it. But again, that doesn't help me get to the place where I can work on this full time and kind of see this growing and going forwards in the way that I would like it to. And so the business decision has to be like, how do I get this thing to a place where it can essentially generate my living, like my income. At the bare minimum. Like what I'll eat soup and spaghetti, like every day I don't care. I just like, what can I cut down on? What can I get to that's going to make me get to full time on this thing? And the reality is there's kind of only two ways of doing it. You build a product that's sort of adjacent to it in some way, and it might not have anything to do with it, but just for the fact that you're building it, so you own it, and therefore any revenue that you make from it comes to you, hopefully profit. The other thing is that you actively sell the thing that you built. And yeah, just like putting it to brass tacks, that was not going to happen with sponsorships anytime soon. Not without lots and lots of effort and distraction on my part to get there. And so I just decided, well, I've spent months and months building this thing now that is, I believe, is going to be attractive to a lot of businesses. They're going to be able to make money off of this, because they're going to be able to move faster, because they're going to be able to use the technology they've already invested in, rather than like hiring other developers, or going and training existing staff up for thousands of dollars. So I think I'm like within my rights to say, like, just pay me a little bit of money and then you can have access to this thing. And so yeah, that was it. Although I'll say it was hard to kind of come to that conclusion. That's because I kind of feel like I'm not used to charging people money for stuff aside of my own consultancy time,
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely like a leap to get there. But I think it was the right one. And it in the end, it was an easy decision because, like, financially, it's the one that makes the most sense. There's like discussions over what price do you set and like how do you differentiate all of those things, which is probably for another discussion. But it's been a ride, and it's doing really well. The fact is that like hundreds and hundreds of people are paying to have this thing that, to the comments of quite a few other people, you can get this for free over here, as React Native or Flutter or whatever. So I'm honestly surprised every single day at the moment at the kinds and amounts of people that are paying to have access to this kind of tool.
Mm-hmm.
But to the earlier conversation, in the spirit of what I truly believe, I don't think it makes sense to have it be a paid tool for very long. I do want it to be a piece for the community to benefit from and for other people to build on, and it not be like encumbered by licensing issues and whatever. So yeah, at some point we will open source parts of it, at least. Like I don't know what the shape of that's going to be yet, but the goal in the immediate term is to make it into a sustainable business, and kind of to do that without being able to go to sort of getting funding from lots of other sources and kind of deal with the pressure and whatever of that, is to build up your own little war chest. And I kind of feel like that's what we're doing right now. And then with that, build an adjacent product that makes sense for that community to use and pay for. And they'll go, oh yeah, well, that makes sense. And I can see the value in paying for that. So I'll pay you for that, but then get this for free. And it's like, yeah, that all works now because it's sort of offset. But yeah, just couldn't, if I'd had maybe another 12 months, could have maybe built the product that lives adjacent to this thing. But I wanted to work a little bit sooner than that. I wanted to bring this out to everybody a little bit sooner.
Yeah. I'm curious. So, I mean, I'm going to say, I feel like there's like a very obvious commercial like play for native PHP. And I think this is something that you're already working on. And I think that like Expo is a great, is a great template to follow because it's just sort of such a no-brainer. The build process for these products, even if you can make it relatively easy, it's slow. You've got cross-platform concerns. It's fiddly. What C compiler do you have installed? What libraries? It, it's always going to be a bit of a pain, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so there's that piece of it, and if you can just like offload the build side to something that's simple, like
Yeah.
that's always going to be. It feels to me like an obvious piece of this puzzle, some sort of paid build service, right? And then there's probably a services model on top of that of like, okay, you're building mobile apps. You need some way to do push notifications. Well, we can just abstract push notifications away into a nice, PHP package that you install that just like works with the API key, and you don't have to think about it. Or sync services, and like I think that all of those things are problems that not each individual developer needs to solve, right? One tool can solve it and just abstract those problems away.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're building an application that you're actually, earning revenue from, some fee to use a third-party tool that just makes a bunch of like the pain go away
Yeah.
feels like a no-brainer, right? And then there's the other things that are kind of like around this type of tool in terms of like some sort of um, certified consultants directory or job board,
Yeah.
or like first party support contracts. I think that there's like an established playbook for a product of this category, and
For
it
sure.
seems pretty straightforward to me. I don't know if it feels as straightforward to you, because I can just say
Mm.
that and then walk away. I don't actually have to. I don't have to like
Chris, come back.
bet my house on it,
Yeah.
right?
No. Um. Yeah. I mean, they're all like things that I'll say I've thought about. That's also easy to say. I mean, the exact shape of them and how I would go about doing them, I haven't thought about in any great detail. But yeah, I mean, like there's nothing kind of new there. And I think some of them will make sense for native PHP. I think some less so, because I think the fact that it builds on top of Laravel, like technologies that people are somewhat familiar with already, should lessen some of the burden, and make some of that whole easier. But there are still going to be pinch points where people go, oh, I'll just pay somebody to have this taken away from me.
Yeah,
And so it's about finding those and kind of, again, seeing the opportunity, taking the opportunity, kind of connecting the wires together as the lightning bolt comes down and that kind of thing. But I yeah, it's tricky to say for certain right now what those things are going to
yeah.
be. I mean, I feel like I've already made a bit of a bet on this with the Zephyr service, which is something
Hmm.
else that I kind of released at the same time. And the goal with that is to just like, there is one pain point that I've personally experienced with certainly building the desktop apps. And I think this will become true ultimately of the mobile apps as well. In the PHP code that is shipped with them is not like packaged up in any kind of way. And that has raised questions from people who are switched on and kind of know what they're doing around the security. And the fact is, if you bundle up a native PHP app today with just your Laravel code in there without doing anything special, you're going to ship a bunch of essentially read write PHP scripts in a folder somewhere, that's going to get installed on somebody's machine and the engine in order to operate them. So you basically just created a backdoor, and everybody's like, I don't want to say it that way. That's actually really bad, but it is the truth. Like you've just like, if you don't do something to harden that code, then it's definitely not safe. I'm not going to say how I think you can exploit that, because that's not right. But the point is, it is, and we make that clear to people when they run the build. Is like, this is insecure. Like you shouldn't ship this to people. Um, And part of that then is to like, how do we make this secure? How do we make PHP so secure when we're doing this? And there are a few tools that have existed before, and some of them work and some of them don't work really. I don't. Have you ever done on-prem software stuff for people?
I mean, I've used oh God, what is Ion Cube or
IonQ,
what?
yeah.
Yeah, um, yeah. We've run some software that's protected with those extensions, but uh, I have avoided it as much as I could.
Yeah, I mean, my experience with them has only been pain,
Yeah, for
and
sure.
largely because they don't sort of keep up to date very quickly with
Yes.
and I think that's a function of the fact that there's not enough people really doing that in the PHP ecosystem to warrant it. And I think
Yeah.
native PHP could change that for those organizations, honestly, because I
Sure.
think essentially they could work, and whether they do right now or not is a question that still needs to be answered. But there's going to hopefully be more people in PHP and Laravel shipping desktop and mobile apps, and um, that's a almost perfect solution to a really important pain point that everyone doing that is going to have.
Hmm.
So, like, part of it is, do we compete against that? Like, and I've said, well, yes, I think we should. I think we need a first party solution that's like the official way to distribute apps safely. And I think there are some natural outcrops from that. One of the things that I get asked quite a bit now is, can we do like what you can do with Expo, where you don't have to go through like App Store review to get your app updated.
Yes.
Uh, whilst we don't have the tooling yet to do that, what we're building with Zephyr will enable you to do that. So I
Hmm.
think that'll be a piece that makes perfect sense within that product to have. Um, but yeah, and there's like things around that space, like the services space adjacent to native PHP, um, feel like they make the most sense to try and buy it off. Um, but the problem with them is they're all dependent upon adoption.
Yep.
And so then you get into this like,
It's a chicken and egg.
exactly, which side of the seesaw do I put my effort onto right now? Do I put it onto building products and services that serve a non-existent community, or do I do some behavior that makes this community swell, such that they're at a point where they need those products and services? And the fact is, if you've got like a small team, like one, two, there's a handful of us now kind of contributing to this stuff, but if you've got a small team, how do you work on more than one thing at a time? And then
Yeah.
it's not even a software problem. It's not a PHP problem or a Laravel community problem. It's the good old business, like, how do we do multiple things at once, without lots and lots of money already in the bank. Um, and frankly, that is just very hard to resolve unless you've got a sort of a golden goose. And uh, I'm having to build my own golden goose. That's basically where I'm at right
Yeah,
now.
I mean, I think like the solution is either figure out how to grow sort of slowly and sustainably
Yeah.
or find funding, right? I mean, because certainly I just looked it up. Expo, the reason that they were able to release the way that they did, right? Build a project that is free for everyone for years
Hmm.
before introducing a product is they had millions of dollars of funding, like that's
Exactly.
that's the other path, but that's you know it's not
That's a decision that you've got to make. It's like,
yeah.
I don't think. I mean, maybe I don't know, so I shouldn't really speak to this, but something tells me deep within my soul that the person who decided to start that organization didn't go, I really enjoy open source and I want to do open source for the rest of my life. They probably started with the way to create a good business here is to open source a tool so that adoption is very high. The
Right.
way to be able to do that well and quickly is to go and get a load of money. So we go and get a load of money, we go and build a team, we build the thing, release it for free, evolve it for a bit, and then we chuck like services on top that people have to pay for. And now they're in our ecosystem, so they have to, like if they really, really want it, they're probably going to buy it from us rather than
Yep.
go and build it themselves. And that's a completely valid and perfectly fine business strategy, but that is a decision. Somebody
Yeah.
said, this is the kind of business that I want to run. And or hopefully they did anyway, and they've got what they wanted. But yeah, I mean, like, just being frank, that's not the kind of business that I want to run. I don't want
Yeah.
to go and get tons of investment. I've been like back on Twitter in 10 years ago, there was the whole like what's the word? Self-funding, bootstrapped is the word I'm looking for. Bootstrap business. We're not going to be laced up to any particular investors, and have all of these tricky terms splattered all over our products and our business. We want to have the freedom to sort of run by ourselves in the way that we would like, and we'll sort of live or die on this hill of figuring out ourselves. And I kind of still have that dream, if one day doing it that way.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll see.
Well, I'm looking up and I see we're at an hour and 40 minutes. I have like more things that I want to talk about, but I also want to respect your time. So if you want to close things down, we can. If you want to keep on going for a little while, I'm game.
I
Give you the
mean,
option.
like, if you really want to, let you hit me. The
All
only
right.
thing I've got to do is eat food and drink water. Those things I haven't done for a few hours. So, probably going to need to do that at some point soon.
Okay. All right. Let's go just a little bit longer because I have two things that I've been meaning to get to, and we just keep on going on other interesting topics. But one is I would love to know a little bit about the like technical implementation of the mobile side of things. Like,
Cool. Yeah.
is this a fully custom like Swift application that like you built all of the hooks into native PHP, or are you building on top of an existing like mobile framework? I know that Tori has a mobile option now. I know
Mm-hmm.
there's React Native. Like React Native doesn't make sense here. Maybe Ionic, but like,
Yeah.
uh, what path did you decide to go down there?
So I looked into a couple. Tori was the first one because I'd kind of started my whole native PHP journey with
Yeah.
exploring Tori, and my first thought was, I don't want to figure out how to do the mobile stuff. Like, if I can just interface with the thing that does, much like we've done with Electron, on the desktop, then great. I'll just have that thing speak to PHP, have PHP give it whatever it needs, and ipso facto, the thing will work, hopefully. And I tried doing that with Tori, and I kind of got so far down the path, and then I hit the really fundamental roadblock, which is I can't ship a PHP binary to an iOS device and just have it run, because
Hmm.
iOS does not let you ship like third-party binaries as part of an application and just execute them at will.
Right.
So you have to. So I couldn't even do that in Tori, right? So even though Tori can compile down into essentially, an iPhone application, I couldn't just throw PHP in there and have it work. There was still this fundamental piece of like, I need to squeeze PHP into this in a different way. Like, it must be done some way that I've never been able to do it before, or figured out, or even knew about. And it turns out that you can, actually compile PHP down to its own like shared library, essentially. So rather than it be a standalone executable that can be shipped off from one device to another, it can just be a library that you inject into another application. So it's a C library. I didn't even know PHP could do that, honestly. I was just like totally oblivious here, just doing web development for 20 years, like, yeah, PHP is great. I love this language. I don't know how to do anything with it really, but like, and then I sort of, Chat GPT, I think it was, said, why don't you just compile PHP down to a C library? And I was like, you what now? So, you start down the path of like, how the heck do I do that? And like writing all these scripts, hacky scripts to try and figure out how to compile this stuff, and like compiling over and over again and finding out that it doesn't work. And at this point you've got to do the piece of like testing it on a device. You've got to
Yeah.
get this thing onto the actual platform that you want it to run on. And I can't emulate that really on my computer. I can run it in a simulator, the iPhone simulator, but essentially that's like running on an iPhone. So I've got to get something onto the device.
Yeah.
And in order to do that, you need a Swift application, right? The bare bones version of that is like, I just need a screen with a web view, because I'm expecting to output some web something, even if it's just text, like it'll render in a web view, and it's going to be fine. I actually didn't end up starting with a web view, as it happens, but what I needed was just like, I can call this PHP library and it's going to do something and it's going to return some text, and I just need to render that text into a component into this app and just like see if it's then working or not. And the amount of times that I ran this thing and it just crashed out because it just wasn't built properly is like, I must have run it thousands and thousands of times, and wasted a lot of my life. But no, it wasn't a waste. It was worth it. What it ended up then with was like, well, I've kind of got this shell of an application now that doesn't use Tory at all. And this PHP C version is working now. That was like the eureka moment again. This isn't the static PHP binary that I can ship to every machine. This is just for an iPhone, and it's not really a standalone binary. It's this embeddable thing, so it needs to live inside this Swift application. But the fact that I've got it all hooked up and working together, and I haven't had to use any intermediary stuff, like this is like in the almost truest sense, as true as it can possibly be for PHP, native PHP now. Like I'm running it like right on the metal, pretty much like via Swift. And then that just like cracked open the door like super wide of like, okay, now what can I do? So yeah, it's different, and it doesn't rely on any intermediary stuff, and it is it's like a combination of some custom C stuff and custom Swift stuff, but the Swift stuff is fairly basic.
So is it still interacting with the like server API? Like you're translating, are you intercepting WebView requests and then translating those into requests that you pass into PHP, or?
Yeah, at the moment, it's piggybacking off of the kind of general functionality of a web view, which operates in the same way, right? It's the request response cycle, forming headers, forming bodies, like mushing all of that together and passing it around. But instead of it going between a client and server, or like HTTP requests in the true sense over like a TCP socket, like it does in native PHP for desktop, it's now just all like in memory inside of this one Swift application on different threads. So there's a thread that runs PHP when it's needed and like shuts down, but it passes all of the information from the web view that it needs in order to like inflate PHP's universe with the right stuff that looks like it's come from a web client, Because it kind of has, but it just hasn't gone over the web. It hasn't even gone over TCP. It's just there.
And is that something that you think you'll explore for the desktop as well eventually?
Yeah, that's what I was alluding to earlier. I think it makes so much sense in both contexts to have it then working in a very similar way.
Yeah.
The only thing with it is that what we're used to in PHP now in the server world is we have FPM, which is a process management, which kind of keeps PHP spun up. If not your application hot, at least PHP is kind of hot and ready to go. And so getting started with a new request is generally very quick. PHP is really good at that anyway, but it's even better when it's all kind of the engine's turned on and it's ready to go. On Swift, we don't have that yet. So because there's no server, there's no forked processes that waiting around. It's literally as it needs to, it'll spin it up and then it'll shut it down completely. It does have to start literally everything from scratch. But I say all of that because I think it's relevant context, and it will have some people thinking, well, that means it's going to be slow. And the reality is, no, it's not, because the network's not involved.
Right.
So the problem we have with that kind of scenario in a traditional server to client is you've got the overhead of the client HTTP requests, the network, and then unpacking all of that before it even hits PHP, which, depending on where you are in the world and how quick the network points are, it could be hundreds of milliseconds before that gets over, and it could be hundreds of milliseconds before your response gets back. So when you add all of that into then PHP taking, maybe 100 milliseconds to do all of this work, it might get close to a second of delay. So you want to make that as quick as possible when it's running on a server. But in this environment where there's no network, you kind of don't have to think about it. So, I do want to. We definitely want to make it even faster, but it's so fast. The PHP is so fast all by itself. And I feel like we've unlocked something by doing this. The idea, the concept that PHP is actually viable for a lot of this stuff. So I hope we have anyway. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the next 12 months or so as we start really digging into how can we make this even better? Can we bring this to the desktop? And we definitely will be doing that.
And it seems like the polling problem is something that you can solve, right? It feels like in that dynamic library type scenario, there's a world where you can just always have a PHP thread ready and waiting for the next request, right?
Yeah. It's just a case of solving those specific problems. And I haven't had time to even dig into that side. There's so many other pieces that kind of I want to get right. And now that people are also paying to have this, and they're sort of saying we want this and we want that, and it's that's great. So I want to service those requirements, and then eventually I expect the requirement will be, we want this to perform a little bit better, and then we'll go, cool, yeah, okay, we can do that, and we'll dig into it at that point.
All right. So the last thing that I've been curious about, and you and I talked about this a little bit. I can't remember when, but it feels to me like the natural end result of this project is that at some point you're essentially going to have to re-implement React Native as a Blade implementation.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I am down with that 100%. It was one of the first thoughts that I had, as what are some of the crazy, you just go, well, maybe you don't do this, but I do this. It's like, that's the craziest thing that you can think of? My imagination's really poor. So like one of the craziest things I could think of is like, what if you could write Blade templates and it rendered native components? And yeah, I mean, I haven't really started exploring that yet, but fundamentally there's nothing to stop that from being a thing. So um exactly how it would operate, I don't know, but essentially you're looking at something like a view entry point, where it would receive a kind of a request, um, and it's going to run PHP code, Blade compiled down into PHP, which is going to run a bunch of native functions. And just the way that you've laid out it's essentially a HTML file, right? But the way that you've laid out that file of Blade components would then be reflected in the layout of the view on the Swift, like Swift UI or whatever the equivalent is on Android, and have it kind of do that for you. So yeah, I mean, that's at least the fundamental piece of that in making it work. In theory, works in my head. There's a lot of other stuff to come off the back of that, though. Like, how do you make those components actually reactive? And I was looking at how React Native does that, and it is crazy complicated. So, that's going to be quite interesting and a fun project. But that's definitely something I would love to get into. And I think that's also part of why I think it's important that this project gets that funding support in one way or another, so that it doesn't have to be me even, but somebody can like have the time to dig into this stuff, because I think it's going to be freaking cool when PHP developers can do all of that as well. So yeah, I'm very excited for the future of that kind of stuff in this ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like kind of coming back to a much earlier part of our conversation. Like, it feels like uh, there's like a back of giant
Yeah.
here. Like, there's somebody needs to. I don't know. This is something that I think about a lot. I feel like there's so many great tools right now um, for like bridging the gap between the back end and the front end in Laravel.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I still personally feel like they all feel like um, a stepping stone to something else. I don't know what the something else is yet.
Mm-hmm.
But it still feels like there's an opportunity to blur the line further, um, and that like when someone figures that out, it may unlock a lot of really interesting things. This maybe is one of them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, um, because fundamentally, I don't know, and this is something. I think this is a relatively controversial opinion, but like I think that JSX, maybe not React, but sort of a XML style UI language that sort of blends the functional and the display together in like I think a pretty elegant way. I think that that is one of the best ways to build a reactive UI.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think that there's a world where Blade has more of that, um, and that could unlock a lot. But it's like there are so many hard problems to solve to get
Mm.
from point A to point B, and I think that Livewire is solving a lot of them in one way, and I think that Inertia is solving them in another way, and there's a lot of
Mm.
really smart intention put behind this problem.
Yeah.
Um, but I think there's something more that we can eventually that we'll eventually have something that is more. Um, And I think that whatever that is maybe unlocks
Yeah,
a whole new world of things for native PHP as well, potentially. I don't know.
I completely agree with you. I and just to maybe even touch on some of what those things are. I mean, I think fundamentally where we're at right now with some of the technologies you mentioned, like Livewire and Inertia, is that they're very focused on the paradigm that we're so familiar with. You know, the divide between the back end and the front end. And the famous Aaron Francis has done these incredible videos all about this. You know, kind of like how we're bridging that gap and um, bringing those things closer together. But I think fundamentally, when we step away from like I'll say the web as the application layer, um, you start to see that the back end and the front end, they're already like sort of cohesively, you have to think of them as one application. Even if you have a team that works on the front end team and the team that works on the back end team, they
Yeah.
are coupled. Like people like to throw this around, like we decouple our front end and our back end, and we have this API layer in between, or whatever, and we've got microservices up the wazoo and blah blah blah. But at some level, those two things are fundamentally coupled in a way that is inextricable. They are one application.
Yep. They're
So
decoupled until you need to add something that a button on the front end does that needs to
yeah,
call something on the
exactly.
back end.
Exactly, which is basically all of interaction. And so when you step away from that, you start to see, oh, like that application actually looks exactly like this application over here, but they are built with completely different paradigms. Like this has a UI library and tooling around that that's evolved from decades of building UI libraries in applications that don't use or have to think about splitting their UI and their backend over a network. And so, like, you've got all of these affordances because they haven't had to deal with this problem.
Yeah.
But now, if we like just, I can see that if I squint my eyes a little bit and make it all a bit fuzzy, they're kind of the same. And so, when we get to that place in code, I think that's going to be one step where we've kind of gone, and I think libraries have tried to do this in the past. Um, I can't remember the name of it now, but there was a one that looked like it was like Objective J. Somebody had come up with this like new
Mm.
JavaScript language, and they built a whole library on top of it, which had a very fancy logo and website and all of this stuff, but ended up not really going anywhere. But people built some applications with it, and it was like, oh, this is cool because it smooths over all these cracks and it operates in the way we think about when we think of if we've come from Objective C and like building applications for a phone or a Mac or whatever. And it's like, I don't think it even necessarily comes to like a technical solution, but it's almost like if you can make these tools feel familiar enough to people coming from the other side of this equation, then then you're kind of doing it. Like you might feel like you're a bit fake and you're not like you were saying earlier, I shouldn't be allowed to do this, but it's like the end result's going to be the same. So that's one thing for me, is like when we start to see these things as that they're basically the same thing. But the other piece is that and I think Taylor's spoken to this as well, particularly about Blade, is that the Blade isn't really a language. It's not really a templating engine at all. It's like regex replacement on
Hmm.
steroids. Um, and I think if we're going to use Blade for this, or something like Blade in the PHP world, it needs to be at the next evolutionary cycle to what Blade is right now. I don't think Blade can do this at the kind of performance and flexibility that's needed with the way that it currently operates.
Yeah.
And I do actually. There's one person that I know of that at least is sort of pushing the boundaries on that. A guy that I got in touch with through the Statamic community.
Mm. John
Um,
Foster.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And he's been doing stuff on essentially Blade things. I mean, he was doing stuff at on Antlers. I think it's Antlers that they called it inside Statomate, which is essentially a kind of port of Blade, with some variations. But that's maybe doing somebody a disservice. So. But there's. Yeah, he was doing a lot there, and then he sort of shifted his focus onto Blade, and I think he might be the person who's sort of closest to cracking that nut right
For
now.
sure. Yeah, his stuff is really interesting. Have you
Yeah,
seen Dagger,
yeah. I was
the
watching him
project?
come together with that.
Yeah,
That's great.
yeah. I mean, at the very least, he's taken Blade from a set of very complicated regular expression patterns to a proper, lexer and parser, and
Exactly.
it actually, he's built the tooling that lets it be a more sophisticated language. Whether that ever gets first party adoption, I think that unfortunately, Dagger is neat, but it's hard to uh, like go third party for something as central as like the view engine of an MVC
Mm-hmm.
like framework.
Yeah.
um, and so I hope that at some point some of that work can move into Laravel core, to the point where where Blade is like a full blown
Mm.
language that's like fully extensible and parsable, and can be manipulated in more sophisticated ways, because I do think that unlocks a lot of really interesting things down the road.
Yeah. Whether that's applicable for the stuff that we've just been talking about, I don't. It's not like above my pay grade.
Who
But
knows? Yeah,
the fact that John is, a person who's prepared to get his hands dirty with this kind of stuff and kind of be
yeah,
playing in that sandbox, suggests that he's probably at least close to something there, that would be relevant for what we're talking about. But
yeah.
I think it is really interesting because all of these things, people are like putting effort into all of this stuff. Again, going back to the open source conversation, like a lot of it for free without any expectation of, any payment or compensation in any real way. And I think that's to be massively applauded over and over and over again, regardless of how like ultimately used and or useful it becomes, because it's just a lot of work. And um yeah I don't know what else to say, but it's just like uh, show them some thanks at least for like all the work that they're putting into the stuff that they're doing. Um and maybe uh give it a go, try stuff out. And you never know, like you might bump into solving one of these problems yourself. I think that's kind of, for me, that's been a big lesson of open source, is like when I've picked into some of this stuff that other people are doing and I've gone like you did, like, what if I put this with that? And then you sort of figure out, oh, this is really easy, or I've created a new solution to a problem I didn't know I had. It's just like, it's very fun and cool. um it's really just, if I can stretch a little bit further, somebody, I have this podcast called The Bucket, which I've been doing with a couple of guys, Stephen and Shane, and we've been doing it for a few months. And they've always been kind of interested in what's been going on in native PHP, but they've not been very involved in native PHP.
Hmm.
But Shane, of the last few weeks, you might have seen some of his tweets because I've retweeted him quite a lot in the last few weeks. But or you're more blue sky, aren't you now? But anyway,
I
uh,
am. I'm not on Twitter at all anymore.
I'll share some stuff over on Blue Sky as well at some point. But basically, he kind of took it upon himself to figure out how to do all of this stuff that I've been doing on iOS for Android.
Hmm.
So I've been on the receiving end of his like fully like emotional roller coaster ride of like, it's never gonna work, I don't know what I'm doing with my life, to the, oh my god, it freaking works, like the elation of like plugging these things together and figuring it out. And I just like, he's a little bit older than me, but the sort of giddy joy of like putting these things together and figuring stuff out, when you, even maybe more importantly than not knowing that there's going to be any real outcome, but because you're not sure if there's going to be any real like value at the end, and you're just doing it for the hell of it, is just so much fun.
Yeah, for sure.
That's the kind, I think that's probably what it is when I say like I want to do open source full time. It's like I'm just addicted to the high of when that happens. I just want to do that all the time.
It's so satisfying, right? When you like pull a thread and you pull a thread and you pull a thread and you just keep on going, and ultimately you like get there.
Yeah.
Oh, that's the best.
And then you can go to bed finally.
Finally. Yeah. Oh, that's funny. Yeah, I met Shane and Steven in at the Upstate PHP meetup it's a while ago now.
I think there's one of those coming up next week.
It's a good one. Yeah. Oh, speaking of which, before we stop, I think we should close up. But you've been out sponsoring PHP meetups.
Hell yeah, it's going really well. Yeah. I mean, like PHP meetups, would you believe they love being sponsored?
Crazy.
Wild. No, it's good. I mean, there's obviously quite a lot of them have been reaching out to me, sort of receptive to the idea of having some money. But it's been, again, great to like get in touch with more of the people who are sort of organizing these things for the community and getting to know what they're interested in. And obviously I want to go to them with I've got a thing that I'm trying to get you to shill for me, like this is native PHP that I'm selling. So there's a quid pro quo with money involved. But it's been really good. I think one of the things though that I will say, a lot of meetup organizers don't seem to have a clue about what is sponsorship. Like, how do I get some sponsors? I think they need some help. Some help, Chris. Can you help?
No, that's something that I'm working on in all my free time. But so we've got PHPX, a bunch of PHPX meetups running now. And I put together some resources, but I have a lot of hope that someday I'll be able to put together more. And that's a big one. Is just like, there's the first steps of just getting that core of people together who are actually going to show up every month or every other month or every quarter or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But at a certain point, you can do that. I like to tell everyone, our first PHP Philly was in a pizza shop with 2 other people. It doesn't have to have any expenses whatsoever. But at a certain point, it's nice to be able to bring pizza to a venue, bring some drinks, maybe even do a giveaway from time to time, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And helping these meetups get to that point is definitely something that I want to put some energy into. So, I'm still waiting on your PR. The PHP world repo is open source. You can just PR yourself right to it. No, I'm just teasing.
No, but, I'm so bad at remembering to do things. Let me just write this down. We used to do this meetup when I was back in the UK many years ago when I started my dev career, and I lived in a town called Birmingham, and it's called the Multi-Pack, and it was basically just like a bunch of, it was blokes, unfortunately, mostly at that time, but bunch of blokes go to a pub, order some food, have some drinks, and have a chat. That is literally how it started. And through that, I met people in that I know to this day, some that I've worked with, some that I'm working with right now. I gave my first talks when we had those meetups in venues when it moved from the pub to a proper venue. It's like, it's an incredible time to get involved in meetups at that early stage, and especially
Absolutely.
after we've had all of COVID and everything as well. Now it's like,
Absolutely.
get back
Yeah.
out there, make some friends,
Yeah.
have a few drinks, and soft drinks or not so soft drinks, and pizzas and stuff, whatever tickles your
Yeah.
fancy.
It has
Just
been a
make it happen.
blast. And there clearly is a lot of there's so much energy around
Yeah,
getting back together right now. I mean, you
yeah,
see it in Laracon for sure. The incredible surge of people who are interested in going to these big events, but also you see it in these smaller events.
definitely.
Um, and it's just so nice. It's just so nice to get a chance to sit down with people who do
Mm,
the same thing that you do, are interested in the same like geeky things as you
yeah,
are, and get a chance to chat. And I mean, ultimately that also going back to something that we started out talking about, like ultimately that has been some of the most rewarding part of being
mm,
in the Laravel and open source communities is all of the relationships that I've got to
yeah,
really rely
exactly.
on through COVID, and now we
Yeah,
get to just have be a central part of my life now. It's really
yeah.
fantastic. So yeah, go to if you're listening, go find the closest PHP meetup and look at their next event, because it's great. It's a great time to be doing them.
It is great. I think there's a lot of people who struggle with the larger events.
Hmm.
Maybe like socially they find it difficult, whatever.
Intimidating for sure.
Yeah. Um, and they're an expense. Like
Yeah, for
tickets are
sure.
expensive. If you've got to travel and stay, it's
Yeah.
expensive. If you're doing that, and like I'm freelance, if I do that, I give up paid work, so it costs double. Like
All
it's
right.
even worse.
Right.
So
Yeah.
if you're doing that, it's like, but the sort of, I mean, you do get a massive reward from it. Don't get me wrong. Like the
Yes.
events, being there in person at Laracon is great when
Yeah.
you make the best of it. But yeah, I mean, you can get a flavor of that with the local meetups for sure, and
Yeah.
it might be a little bit lower stakes,
It's a good
low
place to
stakes,
start,
high
at
reward.
least.
Yeah,
I mean, we have uh, two or three people who I met through PHP Philly who are now planning to go to the Denver Laracon.
yeah,
Um,
that's
and I
cool.
think, yeah, I think that like starting to get involved in the local meetup was like that stepping stone for at least one of them. And
Yeah.
yeah, that's cool. At least I think
Now I
so. I
know
don't know.
somebody there. Yeah, I mean, at the very
Yeah.
least, it's like I know one other person who's going to be there, and I can
Yes.
like hunt them down because I can see their massive white quiff from like a mile away. So
Oh man.
yeah,
All right, this has been a blast.
yeah,
At
I mean,
2 hours and
thanks.
17 minutes, I think I need to go get some lunch. Um, but thank you so much. I feel
Thank
like
you.
I'm really excited to see where native PHP ends in the next 6 to 12 months, and where it's going from there.
Yeah, the only way is up,
Um,
baby.
yeah, I mean, we kind of already talked about it, but like, do you have any specific call to action or place that you want to send people to, to end the show?
Just yeah, check out nativephp.com. Obviously, that's the main website for the whole set of libraries. If you're interested in mobile specifically, we have got nativephp.com/mobile, where you can go and buy a license. If you get them now, well, as an early access program, they're quite heavily discounted compared to what they will be. And we've got iOS support today. And I'm really, really happy to say that Android support is coming within the next 2 weeks from this moment. I can't say specifically when,
Ooh,
but it
that's
is
exciting.
coming. It is very exciting. We're wrapping up the final pieces of it right now. So, some big updates coming. And if you're not quite ready, that's fine. Just sign up to the newsletter. Newsletter is completely free. Um, and I don't spam people from that. So only occasional messages. So yeah, it would be great to have you join us in the community.
Awesome. And I'll put all that in the show notes. Thanks again, Simon. It's been so much fun.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chris.
Until next time.